Hey everybody, this is JD Gaming back today with a deck profile of one of my all-time favorites. Yes, we are revisiting Banish Psychics. This was actually a list that I'd been working on finalizing right before we got that firewall banning here. Interestingly, nothing was affected either way for this strategy, so kind of worked out nicely. And I didn't think I was going to play the deck in this version, to be completely honest. Those of you guys who have been following my channel for a while and checking out the Psychic deck profiles probably know that I had ditched Serene Psychic Witch for a very long time, just because it wasn't very conducive to a combo-based strategy in modern speed gaming. So if you think about how her ability triggers during the next standby phase, that's too slow. She has to stay in the graveyard, that's slow. She has to go and not get, miss her timing because she has the when you can effect, so that's not modern. And like everything was going against this card to make the deck viable under Link era in any way, shape, or form. I kind of went with a combo-oriented version with Brilliant Fusion. And then I went and out of nowhere just decided, hey, let's go ahead and play this old school Banish Psychic deck, and to my surprise, it's actually pretty fun to play. You're not going to win any event or anything with this, but for sure you could still have some fun. You just have to build the deck a little bit differently in order to support Witch, if that is your MO for how you get your Psychic combos started. But regardless, I am launching at the same time here in that upper right hand eye card there, an in-depth introduction to Psychics, so I'll go through all of the individual pieces in detail over in that video. This is going to be a let's build of this current classic defensive build of Banish Psychics, and I'll go through my reasonings for things. But if you've not played the strategy before and want kind of a briefing on that, do check out that other video because I go into a lot more in-depth information over on that side. So if you just want to see the deck list, you can check out the description box down below. As always, I have the table of contents taking you to various sections, including the alphabetical A to Z, typical deck profile you're probably used to, that's otherwise at the end of the video. And without further ado, let's build Banish Psychics. The first step in building any deck is to establish the theme and to build a core that supplements the theme's goals. And here we already said we're playing Psychics, and of course we have to start off with Emergency Teleport. Basically, this card, you have to know what it does for Psychics. You play a max of it, and as a quick play spell that brings out whatever piece you need for your Synchro, Link, Tribute, or just teching out effects like Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit or Psychic Jumper, this card does absolutely everything you want for the strategy. And honestly, if this card came to 3 or even 2 copies, the strategy would be a lot more viable as just a fun contender. Right now, though, we have to find some other enablers that will allow us to play the game and get our key pieces started, and that's kind of where this deck suffers the most, honestly. Even beyond just like some of the cards being outdated is the fact that Teleport is not at 3 right now. And next, I decided to go with what I call, kind of casually, the non-urgent teleport. So Serene Psychic Witch, I go into a lot more detail in that information video there, the in-depth profile or in-depth intro, but essentially this card is a floater. Yeah, she's out of date because she misses timing, she needs to stay in the graveyard and yada yada, but she's very powerful nonetheless because she can fetch any Psychic monster with 2,000 or less attack from your deck during the next standby phase whenever she's destroyed by battle or card effects. So as long as she's not destroyed in a chain link that's higher than 1, or there's not like, Call by the Grave, ripping her out of the graveyard, she'll be able to get Esper Girl or whatever else you need in the given scenario. And the fact that she floats in the next turn is kind of interesting because it pretty much means, yeah, it's slow, but you're pretty much guaranteed to get that monster so long as she remains in the graveyard. That monster itself is not going to come out too early, get killed or whatever. You have some freedom to use it for your combos. So that's the main reason we play her. Yes, it's easy to play around if you understand what the strategy is, but realistically a lot of people don't care about what Psychics do, don't know what they do, and a lot of people, as silly as it is, won't even read your old Yu-Gi-Oh cards. So in that sense, there is some room for you to understand how this deck works, build around it, and some cards that we can use to force trigger Witch as well. So she's in here basically as 3 extra copies of Teleport in the sake of just setting up our combos. And then from here, for our power plays, this has become a staple in this strategy ever since, Link era came, at least for me. Basically, 3 Overdrive Teleporter. This lets you go ahead and you have to Tribute Summon him, but you're able to go ahead and pay 2,000 life points to bring out 2 level 3 Psychic monsters. You can only use that effect once per turn, and that 2,000 life really does suck on a Tribute monster when you get hit by like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. But hey, now we have, copies of Called by the Graves actually at 3, so you could theoretically go ahead and play those if you want those as well. But essentially, Overdrive Teleporter is a lot more useful these days because you don't need to go for a synchro summon off of the materials. You could go ahead and link with himself and with the other materials it brings out. Doesn't need a tuner, doesn't need specific levels, and so this card becomes really, really powerful at just bringing out the mass resources you need in order to close out a game. And there are some nice synchro combos, kind of like I talk about in the in-depth intro. There's like a Crystal Wing combo that I always talk about in these psychic decks as well. From here, we play basically two guys that have the same effects, but they're different flavors, as I like to call them. So 𝗪𝗓𝗡𝗘𝗖𝗧 Psychic Cleric is the level 3 guy that you could special summon, and as a result, it ends up becoming extremely valuable when you're playing the Overdrive Teleporter because you could bring it straight out. When it's normal or flip summoned, it changes to defense position, has 2100 defense, lets you pitch a card at any time during your main phase in order to banish a psychic monster from your grave, and when this card is sent to the graveyard, without missing timing, it summons that monster back to the field. Technically, it could summon anything from its pool of banish, because you could banish a card every turn, but why would you be discarding a card every single turn when you only claim one monster? There's no reason to minus yourself into oblivion. But the cool thing with this is this card can loop between themselves, so let's say you brought out 2 copies of this thing with the Overdrive Teleporter, you could go ahead, use the effect of 1 to target a random guy in the grave. Maybe it's Witch, maybe it's Esper Girl, who knows? But then you could go ahead, turn this and the Overdrive Teleporter into a monster, and then, you could go ahead and use this Cleric to target the other Cleric, link up with those. Oh, now the other Cleric comes out, and so on. You can continue looping your creatures in order to not run out of monsters, as long as you have cards in your hand to pitch. So it basically may not gain you advantage in the, basic level on its own, but it does turn every card in your hand into a free additional summon, which is very, very good in link climbing era. So very interesting card for that reason. And the reason I play 3 of it is because you're pulling 2 of the straight from the deck with your Overdrive Teleporter. We only play 2 copies of Silent Psychic Wizard, or at least I do in most builds, and this one's in particular, mainly because it's got the same effect, but it's a normal summon trigger, so you can't special summon it for that effect. You can't just ignition it for its own ability at any time. And on top of that, it's a level 4, which means you can't bring it out of the deck with your teleporter anyway. So even if it had the same trigger, it still wouldn't be able to do anything because you can't bring it out. But you have a 1900 attacker, and again, this guy and Cleric are able to bring out any psychic monster from the graveyard. I have to stress that because that's any synchro monster, that's any combo piece, that's any tuner monster, that's in the future once we get something besides Electromite, it's going to be any link monster as well. So very, very powerful card. We're eventually going to get like that Lambda link monster. I mean, is it Lambda? Is it Delta? I don't even know which one it is. I think it's Lambda. But basically, when that card comes out, we could get that. Anytime psychic monsters come out in the future, these guys are able to recycle them, and so they become quite powerful. So I do like the 2 copies of this just for extra staying power. It's basically you summon this guy, attack with him, and then he floats into something else, or you can go and combo him off yourself with something like Enemy Controller or whatever else. And then from here, the last psychic key card I like playing is a single copy of Esper Girl. You could play multiples of this, but I basically just wanted to go at 1. It's basically icing on the cake. If you fetch this out with Emergency Teleport or Serene Psychic Witch, her ability is when she's summoned from Banish, you can banish the top card of your deck face down. Of course, the Pot of Desires rulings, you're allowed to look at that and see what it is. And then when this card is sent to the graveyard, add that remove card to your hand. Again, can't miss timing, unlike Witch, so I don't know why Witch misses timing when the rest do not. But essentially, Esper Girl gives you back a refund on the card you discarded off of 𝗪𝗓𝗡𝗘𝗖𝗧 Psychic Cleric, and if you have this card in the graveyard, you're basically able to recoup that loss so you don't minus as you make your plays, or if you have something else that you're making your plays with and it's not Cleric, let's say you went with Wizard, you're gaining a free card, so it actually pluses you. And that's just really important. But again, it's one of those things where if you have access to it through Witch or other means, you don't really need to play a lot of them. If you weren't playing Witch and Teleport still at 1, in a combo-oriented deck, it may be worth playing 2 or 3 of these things, maybe even a Foolish Burial to access it, but for right now, in this particular build, I just like the 1. Our next section here is going to talk about the tech in the main deck that allows us to make the most of that Psychic Engine, and starting off, I like a full 3 copies of Link Slayer. This card is absolutely awesome as just a generically viable Earth monster. Level 5, special summons itself for free regardless of your opponent's field as long as you control no monsters, which means it's good going first or second, and if you happen to be going second, you can yard cards from your hand in order to destroy that many spell or trap cards, up to 2 of them, and that's really powerful on this guy because you need at least one psychic monster in your graveyard for your cleric, for your wizard, for your psychic plays to go off, and 𝗪𝗓𝗓 gets you that first psychic. It's also a high level monster, which means you can go ahead and tune it with some of your other guys and then make a big synchro monster with very minimal investment. So overall, very flexible. It's kind of just coincidence that it happens to be an earth monster. You know, we're not playing Redox, we're not playing Grand Soil like back in the day we might have, but you know, it's still a very powerful card just in general because of its traits and the fact that its earth doesn't hurt at all for things like Mrs. Radiant. Then I like playing 2 copies of 𝗪𝗓𝗓 to help make further plays. Essentially what happens with this strategy, I feel, is you end up having your Serene Psychic Witch is a level 3 monster. You can bring that back with 𝗪𝗓𝗓 because upon normal summon, you just recycle a level 3 monster. Its effects on the field are negated, but Witch activates in the graveyard, which is fine. On top of that, this card is a 1-card Mrs. Radiant. It potentially becomes a synchro play if you bring back a tuner monster, but you could just go into a link monster with it again, which is, you know, even better than it was back in the past. And on top of that, the fact that this gives you 2 monsters when you have things like Teleport that gives you a free monster, or Witch makes you not lose a monster, and we'll talk about some other options as well, means 𝗪𝗓𝗓 becomes a very easy way of bringing out multiple creatures that you need to go for something like Trishula. So, you know, Trishula needs a tuner and 2 or more non-tuners to total 9. It's very easy to do, a level 3 tuner and 2 non-tuners, and 𝗪𝗓𝗓 brings 2 of those materials right to the field, and Witch floats into the others. So Trishula is a big threat that this deck is able to pull out pretty much at any point once that first Witch goes to the graveyard, and 𝗪𝗓𝗓 facilitates that, on top of just giving more power of plays off of a normal summon. So I definitely like it for that reason. And then to kind of tie in with both of those previous cards, I like playing 3 copies of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. So yes, it has a hard once per turn clause, but it's a psychic level 3 light tuner monster who's of course very popular as a hand trap. I don't think it needs an introduction there, but don't forget Ghost Ogre does activate from the field for the exact same ability, which means you're able to go ahead and bring this out with your Overdrive Teleporter and put it into play with Emergency Teleport, or you can bring it back to the field using your Hush Psychic Cleric or Silent Psychic Wizard, and it'll still be able to snipe one of your opponent's cards. Even if they know it's coming, it's having essentially another disruption on board, and it's very powerful for that. And then it's also a hand trap, meaning in this strategy goes to the graveyard early. It's a psychic that yards itself, which is kind of what we wanted to solve using 𝗪𝗓𝗓. It gets that first psychic in the grave so that we can get our Hush Psychic Cleric combos and such rolling. And then of course you can 𝗪𝗓𝗓 it back, tune it with your 𝗪𝗓𝗓, etc. Overall, it's a very flexible card, but it's extremely powerful in psychic specifically because we have the extra synergy. And then from there, we're not done with the hand traps. I like playing some other ones as well. I play 2 copies of Construction Train Signal Red, in addition to 2 copies of Swift Scarecrow. So very briefly on Scarecrow, this thing makes it so if you get direct attack, you discard 1 and end the battle phase. And so it's if you set Witch and have one of these, you live. So that's the whole point of that. We play 2 copies to ensure, you know, we have some access to I don't want to die from setting Witch. Because again, this deck combos off so hard once it gets that first Esper Girl out or whatever, it gets the first Witch in the graveyard that, you know, against a lot of random rogue strategies, it's not that terrible of a pick. But the problem is if you die through that Witch because your opponent just goes all in and says, hey, you just set a monster and nothing else, I'm just going to kill you, this card stops it. Train also kind of does that because in general it's not a very good card, I don't think, but it still finds a home in this strategy. I feel it's a level 3 earth monster, which means it has perfect synergy with all that other stuff. It can be 𝗪𝗓𝗓, it can go with 𝗪𝗓𝗓 for Trishula or with Witch, etc. It's an earth monster, so you can Nitria synchro with it, all that stuff. But it says when an opponent's monster declares an attack, doesn't even have to be direct, it could be on your monster that you can protect. You could special summon this card from your hand and make your opponent attack this card instead, go directly to damage calculation, and this card doesn't die in that one battle. And sure, it's not Marshmallow, and it can be killed right after, but let's say you get your Witch killed, right? So your Witch took a hit, and then you summon this, you take another hit, and then it dies. After that, it takes 3 hits to kill it, so with their 2, maybe 3 remaining monsters, if they actually got, you know, full 5 plus a link monster, they're probably not going to kill you, because on average, even if they hit 2,000, that's 6,000 life points. You're going to live a lot of games just from having this card on top of your Witch. But as if that weren't enough, in the instance that you're not going to die and you're not in danger of, you know, just being knocked out, hang on to this until your opponent's last attack, because you can ensure it stays on the field going into your next turn. Let's say it was that witch and you brought out Esper Girl. That's a level 2 Earth and a level 3 non-tuner Earth. That's an 𝗪𝗑𝗓𝗑𝗄 for free. Or you could go for some other synchro play or link play or whatever using this. And again, that ties back into using Crane for Trishula easily, because it puts an additional monster in addition to what else you're able to put into play between the witch and the Crane. So overall, this card's actually better than Swift Scarecrow in the scenarios where you're not gonna die. But because I understand there are some crazy strategies that, you know, are able to kill you, I decided let's go for some variety, 2 and 2. That way you have a little bit of a backup. Realistically, I feel Construction Train is a little more important in this strategy than Swift Scarecrow. And then to wrap out the hand traps here, I like just going with the 3 copies of Ash Blossom. It may not be a psychic monster, but it's still very powerful at controlling your opponent's plays, softens them, slows them down so that you're not going to just get totally wrecked in the face. And as a tuner monster, again, you can crane it back or tune it with your Link Slayer to make proactive plays as well. So very powerful for that. And then some more generic monsters. We have Glow Up Bulb. This is just one of the best generic Earth monsters you can throw in here. It's not particularly amazing at any one thing, but it's extremely flexible. It's a free discard off of Link Slayer or off of Hush Psychic Cleric. Potentially you could play Foolish Burial with this card if you need more access to Esper Girl or something along those lines, or if you want to play some other cards. Glow Up Bulb just comes back for free. It's an Earth monster, which means you can make 𝗪𝗑𝗓𝗄𝗓 with it, you can make Mrs. Radiant with it, or it just becomes a free Link material. Overall, not a bad card by any means, and they're only gonna get, you know, it's only gonna get better when we get things like Needle Fiber or some other cards down the line. So I still like this card just for its generic utility. I really do miss having Dandelion, because then I did play Dandelion and Foolish with this card, but still good because you have so much ample discard fodder in your core plays. For more Earth tuner monsters, I play 2 Psychic Jumpers. That's why I play only 1 Esper Girl. This thing essentially lets you force creature swap one of your opponent's face-up monsters with a different Psychic monster that's not named Psychic Jumper at the cost of 1,000 life points. But the fact that you choose is so much more viable than that out-of-date spell card, because now I can steal my opponent's Link 2 or 3 and then turn it into my own bigger monster, or I can trade them my Witch, who's a floater, or my Wizard, or my Cleric, and run over my own floaters, claim their effects while my opponent is down a card. This card is absolutely insane, but it's only really good in strategies where you play Serene Psychic Witch or you play Teleport, and in this strategy, since we're playing both, we can go ahead and safely run the Psychic Jumper as just a steal my opponent's card and, you know, run away with it, basically. And it's a level 2 tuner, so you can still make 𝗪𝗑𝗓𝗓𝗓 and such. And then the last monster here is Psi-Blocker. This card is just a one-of because you summon it off of Serene Psychic Witch, and in the in-depth intro, I kind of talk about very briefly, but essentially the card reads, once per turn you can declare a card name. Cards with that name and their effects cannot be used until the end of your opponent's next turn. And essentially use means nothing starting with that card can be done. So no changing battle positions, attacking with it, using its effects, even if they're already on the field, you can't do anything with it. Basically lingering effects that have already been cast on the game state. Something like, if you think about Shockmaster, right? I can't think of a good example off the top of my head right now that's really relevant, so I'm not even going to try. But essentially, you know, something where a condition has already been placed on the field, yeah, you're not going to undo that. But essentially, if there's any continuous floodgate or an annoying trigger effect or whatever, you just go and use this. It's bait. And the cool thing is, it does say once per turn, but it's not a hard once per turn. And in this strategy, it's very, very likely that you'll be able to use Silent Psychic Wizard or Hush Psychic Cleric, even more so, in order to recycle this twice in a turn, and then you'll be able to use its effect, you know, 2 or 3 times and be able to block whatever else is ailing you at the moment. So I like the 1 copy, just fetch it off Witch. It's a level 4, so you can go for Black Rose easily off of it as well. After you get rid of one of your opponent's defenses, you just blow up their entire board while everything you have floats. It's just a cool one-of tech that, you know, for a while I've been playing around with. How many of this do you play? And I feel like that's really format dependent, but overall it's a very powerful card. Helps you out some nasty game scenarios. And then the centerpiece here, the only trap card we play is 3 copies of Torrential Tribute. This card's in here because you have all monsters that float, and you can basically blow up your own Witch, your Clerics, whatever. Your guys replace themselves, and it's also a great way to force your Witch to trigger. So if your opponent's going for something like Nightmare Unicorn, they're trying to spin you away, they invested some monsters into a link, but boom, you Torrential Tribute, kill everything, your witch triggers, they lost their setup, and they probably can't kill you in addition to, you know, all your hand traps that you have, and your witch is now set up for next turn where you can pretty much just put game on board, because again, this deck does take setup, but once it gets that witch going, especially when Torrential Tribute clears their field, and you know, if they can't continue extending, they may be dead right there. So very powerful card. I love it for its applications. And just fun fact, don't forget this card lets you dodge some effect negation as well, depending on how it's worded. Like, I know effect failure can't play around Torrential for that easily, so you know, it does reward skill play, and I really do love it for that reason. Then, just to finish out here, some power spells. We play one Soul Charge and one Gorgeous. I love this Korean version of Monster Reborn here. Essentially, all your monsters are Links and Synchros, and those are pretty good monsters to bring back. Link monsters because their ratings carry up and climb into higher ratings, and Synchro monsters because they're boss monsters completely in one package. They don't need materials, they don't need to point at anything, they just go to the main monster zone off of these cards, and then you just have full access to their abilities. And quite honestly, compared to some of the other mechanics, yes, they're inconsistent to summon, but Synchros are quite powerful. They have a lot of staying power. They don't take a lot of costs for things. Like something like Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend just activates as an ignition effect without a discard or whatever. So overall, both of these are really good, and they help you make combos. They bring back your boss monsters. Overall, they do pretty much everything you want as extenders, but also to kind of force your opponent to fight the bosses one more time. Then I like playing 2 copies of Pot of Desires. Despite playing 1 Esper Girl and stuff, you know, when Witch is in the equation, you're able to go ahead and draw into all the key pieces that you need once you've plucked out, you know, the one-ofs and stuff. It essentially gives you just the free extra card, and that's really important for speeding up such a slow deck and bringing it a little bit closer to modern times. Basically, this is the replacement for Pot of Desires from back in the day, or not Pot of Desires, Pot of Duality, where Duality was awesome in a slower format, and you know, you're naturally setting your monsters and doing all that kind of stuff anyway. There's no reason to restrict yourself once that first turn has passed, and now you're summoning your Witch. Now you can't special summon because she triggered in the standby phase and something. Like, Duality just doesn't work quite as well in this strategy as Desires. And I tried playing with multiple Esper Girls, but I didn't really feel like you needed it. Basically, if you get the free plus off of Desires, you're not really needing the plus off of your Esper Girl one time, because usually you get it once, maybe twice. So realistically, just getting this card for the free draw is going to make, you know, bigger strides and a bigger impact, and you know, as an alternative to Esper Girl. Or better yet, if your Witch already died and you got Esper Girl, don't even have to worry about it. You don't care so much about the other cards in the deck. So that's why we play the 2. And then 1 Raigeki. It may not be, you know, Torrential Tribute for the trigger all your own stuff and all that, but in this strategy, I do like Raigeki just because when you're playing with a lot of weak floater monsters, it does kind of help to have the ability to steal your opponent's stuff, especially when you can use things like Ghost Ogre and Psychic Jumper to soften your opponent's field. Raigeki to clean up the stuff lets you just close out games in scenarios you may not be able to otherwise. So I like it in here. It is more of just like a personal, you know, I remember how good Raigeki is for the strategy, and admittedly this deck doesn't have a ton of just like free attacking power, and that's where Raigeki comes in just to help us with that. Then we're talking about our extra deck here to close out. So we play 1 Mrs. Radiant. It used to be the end-all be-all Link monster, you know, when it was the only option, but nowadays it recycles itself, it powers up most of your guys. Naturia Beast at 27 is scary when this thing's here, so really good for that. Don't forget, as a general rule for your Link monsters, that all your Psychics that come back, even the ones from the extra deck, go in your main monster zones, and your Psy-Frame Synchro monsters will go back to the main monster zones by their own effect as well. So your Link monsters don't need to provide a ton of arrows. Mrs. Radiant, therefore, ends up becoming good, but not necessary. It's just like an extra card you can easily make with Crane and such. Lately, I find myself turning it into a Link 2 that goes into some bigger play, like a Borreload, to be completely honest, but it's still good at 1. Then we have Nightmare Phoenix and Nightmare Unicorn. Pretty commonly seen these days. Cerberus is okay, but you don't really need it when you have, you know, your Unicorn getting rid of things. And Phoenix is just so that this deck has 1, extra discard fodder, but 2, access to spell and trap removal without having to rely on, you know, using a Witch Search for your Psi-Blocker or whatever. It gives you a little more freedom to do things with your main deck, depending on the situation, when your extra deck that doesn't affect your consistency at all is able to just go ahead and take care of those problems. So I like these 2. And having the package means you could potentially draw cards off of them. using Unicorn's effect. So there's that. And then the last two cards are just Link 4s. I cut Summon Sorceress so I could play both Borreload Dragon and Borrelsword Dragon. So Borreload is obviously really good. It fits into the theme of Psychics of just pilfer your opponent's creatures using Psychic Jumper, except you don't give them back. They just go back to the graveyard, which is really, really cool with this card. And then the Borrelsword Dragon, basically I've been putting into all my decks that need extra oomph, and this deck definitely loves having this. It closes out more games and wins in scenarios where it shouldn't be able to. Basically, it's able to change one of the monsters on the field, on either side of the field, during either turn, with your opponent not responding, from attack to defense position. If you do, you're able to go ahead and get this guy an extra attack, plus he absorbs half the attack of a monster for a turn while he's attacking. So if he attacks the monster, he gains half its attack, so he does 3k, because basically, you know, you have your opponent gain your own, ends up basically making the difference 3k, but then he carries that boost into killing another monster, and if you have something else on top of that, like a Cyframe Lord Omega or something, then you could close out a game quite easily with this card. So I love these guys because they're big power plays. Summon Sorceress, basically I took out because when you bring out the monster with Summon Sorceress, unless you're sitting on Witch, the effect negation doesn't really help you. And Summon Sorceress could turn into something like, you know, a Firewall, I suppose. But even then, with like when that card was legal, Firewall wasn't best abused in a strategy like this, I felt. It just didn't have enough hand cards, you know, didn't have enough resources to be able to loop with Firewall and make actual useful plays out of it. The other options for just 2 material cards would have been the Topologic Bomber Dragon, which isn't bad, but it's not particularly good in this strategy either. It's not like Sky Strikers where you want to maintain no monsters in your main monster zones, as an example. And Borrelsword does the 3k plus damage anyway, so I felt that was superior there. And then the Griffin, Nightmare Griffin, basically does some utility things, but I don't feel that there's anything in particular that's like so game breaking I want to set it again. Torrential's nice, but I don't know. I just felt these cards make a bigger impact, and when I go for my Overdrive Teleporter, I'm often going for these guys using my Mrs. Radiant as an intermediary in order to go for these guys. So that's why Summon Sorceress is cut. It's not that you can't play it, it's that you would need more of a dedicated play sequence, and I wanted to keep my deck more generalized so that it could, you know, take care of more scenarios. And then from here, we play Naturia Beast at 5 because, you know, negate all spells. It's a win condition, honestly, against certain strategies. So you play mostly all Earth monsters anyway, so just go ahead and play this. You're never going to run out of cards in your deck for its cost, so you summon this against a deck that needs their spells, and then they lose. So that's why that's there. And I talked about these guys for 6s, but basically this is your generic one you can bring off of Crane, and this guy is your big buff otherwise. It needs a Psychic Non-Tuner, which is why you can't bring off of Crane, but 3,400 attack and the ability to see one of the cards in your opponent's hand is absolutely nuts. And if either of these guys dies, because, you know, they have abilities that make it difficult to kill them in battle, they kill it with a card effect, you bring them back because they're Psychic. So, you know, that's where this deck really shines. You invest like 1 card into this using Crane, or Witch Floats into a free material for them, but then you go ahead and bring them back when they fall. Otherwise, they make big impacts on the board, because this is DD Warrior Lady, and this is freaking I look at your hand and, you know, have a 3,400 body on field. So that's why these guys are here. And then a copy of Naturia Barkion as well. Finally, with Altergeists, Paleozoics, and other trap-based strategies, Barkion seems like it's worth playing. You know, it's not just Solemns and Artifact Sanctums for trap cards now, so all of a sudden this card has some relevance. Fairly easy to bring out. It'll be even easier once we get some of those new cards from Savage Strike, because there is an Earth level 3 tuner monster that you could Crane right back, but realistically you could still bring this out quite nicely with your Teleport, your Jumper, your Esper Girl, and like your Clerics and Wizards. So that's why this card is still in here. I feel like the time has finally come for Barkion to be playable again. For our 7s, we have Black Rose Dragon and Cypher Lord Zeta. Black Rose should be fairly self-explanatory, blows up everything, and since all your guys float, it's basically like another Torrential Tribute, but it can take care of back row as well. And then our Cypher Lord Zeta is basically able to go and take one of your opponent's Link monsters or any other attack position special summon monster out of play along with himself for a turn. Then they come back to the main monster zone, so it basically ruins your opponent's sequencing and like positioning of Link monsters while dampening their board, their play, and then you have a 2,500 beater who keeps coming back. Yes, he has a recycle ability, could be more useful once, you know, Cypher Link monster comes out and then it's more splashable, including in this strategy. But for now, just remember, he's a Psychic monster, so you can bring him back every time he falls. So quite nice because of that, gets even more powerful. And then for 8s, we play Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, Cy-Frame Lord Omega, and Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend. So Crystal Wing basically is part of an Overdrive Teleporter play. If you have access to Esper Girl or Psychic Jumper in your graveyard as just a level 2 monster in the graveyard, you basically go for your Overdrive Teleporter, bring out a level 3 tuner and a level 3 non-tuner, synchro them for one of the 6s we talked about, and then when the cleric ties itself to the Esper Girl or Jumper, brings it back, and now you have, you know, the ability to go for any of these guys. But since you have a synchro monster you're tuning into, you could go for Crystal Wing. So that could be like a sequential play where maybe you go for Psychic Nightmare, look at a card in your opponent's hand for free, and then you can go for this. You could go for Omega for more of a hand control strategy. There are a lot of little things you're able to do with this. Because you have the ability to keep looping back your tuners, Crystal Wing fits quite nicely in the strategy, and if you bring it out with 𝗪𝗏𝗡𝗓, that's often enough to seal a game. Omega is Omega. Everything it's able to do normally, it can do here, but don't forget, it's a psychic monster, so it comes back, and it's even nastier here. And then Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend is kind of like that torrential case, the Black Rose case, you know, basically it board wipes your opponent's cards, all your guys except which will float when this card activates, which is nice. It lets you do extra 500 burn for each one of those guys, and it just helps clear the field proactively. But unlike Black Rose, you keep this guy for a 3000 body, and oftentimes that will help you push for extra damage, because again, this deck is good at resourcing advantage and bring out some really powerful control monsters out of nowhere. But you know, we can use cards like this to gain some extra power in the deck to, you know, help close out games faster, so we don't have to float longer where we start, you know, struggling and start drowning in the opponent's overwhelming speeds. And then finally, the last card here, it's weird not playing any fusion monsters, right? We're not playing Seraph Knight or instant fusion targets or anything like that, but Trishula is in here. I basically talked about it briefly with the Crane engine, but essentially very easy to summon. The ability to banish a card from 3 different sections is extremely powerful nowadays too, and yes, there are more counters to it, like 𝗪𝗍𝗪𝗓 is able to stop this as well, but it's still a powerful card, and in this strategy, it's often a 2, sometimes a 1 card play to bring out, and so I think it's worth running here. If you watched the video in its entirety, thanks! Hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing the revamped revisiting of this classic JD strategy as much as I did putting it together. We'll start off with the main deck here. It's 40 cards. We got 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. Got double Construction Train Signal Red for the spicy hand trap tech. Got double Crane, single Esper Girl, triple Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, Glow Up Bulb. We got triple Hush Psychic Cleric, triple Link Slayer, triple Overdrive Teleporter, a teched Psi-Blocker, double Psychic Jumper, triple Serene Psychic Witch, welcome back, and double Silent Psychic Wizard, and then double Swift Scarecrow to end out the monsters. Then we got for spells, Lone 𝗖𝗍𝗘, unfortunately. Hope this card does come back to more than one eventually. We got Monster Reborn, double Pot of Desires, Raigeki, and Soul Charge. And then for traps, just a full playset of Torrential Tribute, again bringing the entire deck count up to a flat 40. And then from here, we play our extra deck. We have Mrs. Radiant and Nightmare Phoenix are our Link 2s. We got Nightmare Unicorn for our Link 3. And then we have for Borreloads, you know, Link 4s, we have Borreload Dragon and Borrelsword Dragon to close things out. That's all you really need because, again, as I kind of talk through the profile, arrows aren't as important in this strategy in particular because your monsters just come back into your main monster zones. And then for our synchros, we have 𝗪𝗏𝗡𝗓 at level 5, HTS 𝗖𝗍𝗪𝗓, we have Psychic Nightmare and 𝗪𝗏𝗡𝗓𝗓 and level 6. Then we have Black Rose Dragon and Cy-Frame Lord 𝗍𝗓 at level 7. Then we got level 8. We have Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, Cy-Frame Lord Omega, and Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend at level 8. And then the Mighty Trishula at level 9. No Brilliant Fusion or anything in this strategy. Just a bit of a slower control combo-based psychic deck of old. That's the end of this video, but there's plenty more where it came from. I invite you to explore the playlists on screen to see what else I have to offer, and if you really liked what you saw today, consider subscribing to JD Gaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JD Gaming, hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.